If Owl Labs has QWERTY keys, if Wuche Studios has Melitrix, then Win Studios has Daring Roll. And with their follow-up, they are as daring as ever. Enter Phil. Phil? Well, Flip6p. Their first keyboard, DR70F, was a good entry into market. With the popularity of FRLs at that time, they actually even made it longer by adding an XT column to set it apart, plus it has the ability to flip the layout as well. As for the Flip6p, it ain't different. As a matter of fact, they even improved upon it. As usual, just managing expectations, this is not going to be a review. Instead, I'm just here to tell you what I think about the board based on the things that interests me. This will be broken down into 3 sections. First is the design, as in aesthetics. Next is the design in terms of modification, basically engineering stuff. And finally, the sound. The aesthetics for me is nice. While some people don't like when the newer release inherits the design of its predecessors, like what Iris Boards has done with theirs, I'm actually a big fan of it. It kept its signature badge, which is very minimal, and it actually works in general. Given that this uses 60% layout as its base, they gave us the ability to change the bottom row from Win keyless, HHKB, and Sangan bottom. I went for the Sangan bottom because Win keyless is unusable for me given that I need Windows key for many of my shortcuts. As for the HHKB, I already have one and it's enough. But not gonna lie, HHKB looks neat. And they gave us a little window where the RGB can shine through. If you're gonna ask me what I didn't like about the design, then I have one for you. And that is that the color choices are quite limited. So in my case, I bought a maroon case color, and the accent pieces colors that I will be getting is just black. I don't have the option to choose another. Now do remember that what we currently have is in stock. If they ever so choose to run a separate GB, if they gonna continue what they did with DR70F, then we'll probably have more options by then. But for now, we're quite limited. Also, I would like to address other people's concern about seam lines for the badges. As a Gunpla enjoyer myself, let me explain. In the world of Gunplas, we have 2 kinds of lines. One is a seam line and another is a panel line. We can all agree that seam lines are ugly and should be sealed up. On the other hand, panel lines are there by design. As a matter of fact, other people add their own panel lines into their kits to make it more detailed. Recent Gunpla releases do incorporate panel lines with seam lines. So instead of sealing up a part when there's a seam line, we can just instead have a panel line there and won't have to worry to seal it up. As for the customizability part, it still uses screw to open up the board, but at least it has pogo pins to connect both PCBs and the assembly to the daughter board. I have no complaints so far, though other people notice that if you haven't aligned the pogo pins properly, then the numpad won't work, so do bear that in mind. Now let's go to the initial sound test part. For the quick rundown of the specs, I'll be using C3 V3 stabs for the short modifiers, 9 stabs plus BCP for the spacebar, GMK TMG for the keycaps, and will only be swapping the switches in the main board, and the numpad part will remain untouched in the whole testing process. If you are surprised on how it sounds, then so was I. For the price and given that this board has a gimmick of being able to flip, then yes, this is definitely a banger. Now, let's turn this board into my own. Let's start with the accent pieces. Remember when I said earlier that it's annoying that its color is tied with the case color? Since I already have a keycap set in mind to use in this board, let me turn this to gold real quick. For the curious, I painted this one myself. As for those who got the hint, yes, since I'm a gunpla enjoyer, I have paints lying around. If you're worried about its scratch resistance, then I'm not. I can guarantee you that this won't be scratched unless you intend to have them scratched. And while the final result isn't perfect, it's not something that I can fix later on. As for the switches, I'll be using HMX Cheese switches. And as for the spacebar, I'll be swapping out the knight stabs to C3 V3 stabs. I'm not swapping out knight stabs because they're bad. As a matter of fact, you just heard in the sound test that they actually sound nice. But with the keycaps that I'll be using, which is Cat Explosion, according to my tests, C3 V3 sounds better. Also, a quick pro tip, these things saved me. I gaslighted myself that I have skill issue or whatsoever even after successfully wire balancing all my stabilizers. But apparently, the reason is I'm using a long pole switch. And yes, it can make your stabilizer rattle, hence TX offers long pole variants of their stabilizers.